Welcome to Architectural Series, Architects Talks or Conversations with Architects. Today it's a hot August day in Bodrum. We are in the lovely library Sua Özkan has donated, and we have a very distinguished guest, Ritchie. Welcome to Turkey, welcome to Bodrum, welcome to our program. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you for the invitation.
What is your first impression about Bodrum?
Walking along the seafront and not being able to see the sea for boats. It's a bit like London. You get lots of red buses, double-deckers, and you can come out at King's Cross Station and not see anything of London other than a line of red buses.
Yeah, that's maybe similar in that aspect. When I was in the first year, I had a professor who used to say, if architecture is not easy enough for you and if you don't love it, go to the School of Medicine, he used to say. And believe it or not, two of my friends did that. Now they are very successful medical doctors. You did vice versa, I think. You started medicine, then bored within your terms and decided to study architecture. How did it happen?
Essentially, my father, who died when I was 11, but he wanted one of his sons to be a doctor.
As many fathers.
He has many fathers. He's Scottish, he was military, and I was the one who had the aptitude for the sciences. So I ended up in medical school, and then I woke up and I thought, I don't want to do this. And recently I had a conversation with Norman Foster about, we were selecting a prize, Berlin Art Prize, and I reminded him the story, medicine to architecture. He said, but that's a massive difference. And I said, it's not, actually. Doctors look after the inside of your body, and architects look after the body in space.
That's true, yes.
So it's all in the mind.
Yeah, I was watching the documentary about Sainsbury Wellcome Center, and I recognize a sense of continuity between medicine, research, and architecture. And if I'm not mistaken, you were giving the same example there.
Yes.
In a similar way, and in a way, it is about investigating, understanding either the inside or outside the body, but the human being. So the processes may be similar. It's actually true for many disciplines. But you also has a significant side. In WAF meeting, you had another interview and you said that social aspect of architecture is being more responsible on one hand, and recovering the territory they lost to other players in the market, namely project managers, quality surveyors, etc. People who measure. I think this was very interesting because it is now one of the significant radical differences in the field of architecture. There is a huge team with or behind the architects, or on contrary to architects, who are trying to manipulate the project in a way. So, I mean, on one hand, this seems a kind of a relaxed medium where you can work in a better condition, but on the other hand, it restricts the architect. Isn't it what you mean?
I think there are the two sides to that. There's the, let's say, the social responsibility, which I think is having a renaissance with younger architects. Mm-hmm. And that social responsibility is the one that the clients don't necessarily recognize. Mm-hmm. And certainly project managers don't recognize it, and nor do quantity surveyors. So on the one hand, you've got an ethical position, and on the other, you've got metrication, everything measured. Mm-hmm. And that's the world that dominates our lives today. Everything is a commodity, everything gets measured. To the extent that even as an architect today, one has to understand so many other things, and we have to prove it. We have to write and do more reports than design. Now, it didn't used to be like that because the architect was trusted to know something. He was also expected to improve the position, the status quo of the city or the architecture or the school or whatever he was working on. It was automatically assumed you would do something to improve and make things better. Each step that you do, each building you do, you make it work better. That was an intuition. Now we have to justify our intuition. And we've got to write it all down so people can understand. So I'm interested in the side of intuition linked with the mind, and how the mind thinks and how it composes, and what we have inherited through our DNA, how our DNA changes during our lifetime. And we have, for example, red, green, blue. Most of us have it, well, 99.99%. So we all understand colour. That's inherited through our genetic build-up of human beings. And then we have our DNA as individuals, and that I discovered through neuroscience changes during your lifetime. Fascinating. So the ability for the mind and your body to take in the environment and the engagements you have with the physicality and other human beings is quite powerful in the sense of it changing us in our genetic build-up. It's amazing to me, which means that through our minds, if we are more acute about understanding our minds, we will design even better. It's inevitable. But we're at the very, very beginning of that world.
That's true. But in this sense, as far as I understand, reducing architecture to templates, measurable things, is an obstacle towards this innovation and progress, maybe.
I think it is. I think it's a bit like one of my favorite frames is progress. What is it? And inevitably you have to come and find ways to make progress happen no matter what the condition you're in. And one of them is laughter. The victory of laughter over dogma is actually a very good sign of progress. How you then translate in a world, as you say, metricated, bossed by other people, your liabilities have increased. You have to just invest even more energy in your understanding of that world to be able to float over the top of it, so that if somebody around the table says, you can't do this, you can turn around and say exactly why you can. And that's the position you have to get to today. It's tough.
Yeah, I'm usually referring it with a concept of critical culture. I mean, if you are not living in a territory where the critical culture is not dominant, then everything is reduced into measurable issues, and the progress is identified by the numeric values. I mean, doing the biggest building, for example, in the shortest time with the lowest budget, etc., etc. Then it is something else.
But that's where we work, or I work, is in the capitalist market. That's been going for what, 400 or 500 years. Yeah, it only has one agenda. It's called growth. People often ask me, well, why haven't you become a very big firm? And I chose to improve my mind and the quality of what we do, not by the numbers in our office, but by the quality and the way we educate and are critical within our office. So we stayed around 25 people for the last 30 years. We could have been huge, but it had no value to me. It was actually that fundamental thing, which is, if you're not growing or acquiring other companies, then you're not actually being a capitalist. Well, I'm not a capitalist. As simple as that.
That's true. And on the other hand, I mean, as you grow, you lose your freedom to choose job, because you have to always feed the monster. Yes, that is, I think. If we go back to 1976, this solar powerhouse earlier we have discussed in France, actually it it has a domain both on ecology and design together, which is very familiar for today's discussion. But it was, I think, quite new when it was designed in 1976. Isn't it so? So how did you come with this? It is a very significant and radical starting point for architecture.
I think,
isn't it so?
I think it's true. I think there were two things that happened. There was the girlfriend, who was always important in life for me, and deciding to leave working with Norman Foster. So I was 28, 29 years old. And I thought, after the oil crisis of 1974, that the very simple idea that why waste money on energy out of your own pocket when you don't need to? It seemed like a really stupid idea. And therefore I couldn't come to terms with, in the end, even the Ipswich building that I worked on, because it's a gas guzzler. And you just can't approach buildings like that anymore. That was what I felt in 1974. So I set out to do it. And it was by accident. Girlfriend, farmers, parents, on a farm, middle of nowhere in France. And they asked me to look at typical houses in the region to see which one they should buy. And of course, I kept saying, well, you have to take the doors off because otherwise you won't be able to see out. And the windows and the orientation, all these things were wrong. And eventually, the girlfriend's father said, well, would Ian design a house for us? And I said, sure, design your house. Where? And he said, in the pig field. I'll fence off a corner of the pig field and you put a house in there for us. And it's going to be where we retire. And I looked at the farmhouse they were living in, which was very dark inside, not, in a way not dissimilar to this sort of building, and that we're in. And I realized that the timber structure was expressed. The walls were made of horsehair and mud, called torchis. I thought, this is really interesting. It's made of the earth and the tree. Simple as that, and you can see it. So I said, well, would you like to have a building made of sand and steel? Because I think I can use those materials comfortably in my mind. And he said, yeah, I'll try. And I said, well, what about energy? And he said, during the war, we used to get the methane off the pig shit with the straw. We used to collect the methane. So if you're going to keep the bills down, I'm all for it, he said. So I said, great. So I can just design what I like, really. He said,
and the house is still there.
And it's beautiful, 40 years old, it's still immaculate. And the funniest moment was, well, two funny moments was, one, I came with a model and he said, you've got a nice car in, well, what's that? It's all glass. But we'll break, if we open the doors, we'll break the glass. And I said, no, because you can only go in because of the way the doors open, dead in the middle. So that's real control. But anyway, it's a buffer to the northerly wind. And then when we were installing the solar panels on the walls, he asked if two of them could be taken away because he would like a better view of the garden. So we did.
I see. Actually, this economy issue, not limited with this oil crisis or energy, environmental sensitivity, I think is a key concept in terms of your design principles, because you are saying economy is more important than gesturing.
Yes.
Isn't it so?
That's true.
Yeah, and so how does it show itself in your design, for example?
Well, if we take the neuroscience building...
Yeah, that was the example I would like to talk about.
We designed that from the inside out. I didn't know what a neuroscience lab was. In fact, every neuroscientist I spoke to had a different idea of what a lab was.
So you suggested a flexible arrangement, I think. You are saying that everybody is free to change.
Fully adaptable, interior space, which meant they're all very, very bright people going in there. They combined electronics, physics, philosophy, maths. I mean, they're bright kids. Why would they have to ring up the management of the University College London to change a wall? So you design the wall, timber, plasterboard, you can knock it down, you can build it whatever shape you want. And all of the services were then installed on more or less a 3-meter grid so that they could bring in the medical gases wherever they built their things. So you might say that's expensive, but actually the walls were really cheap. The flexibility of the services gives the building at least 60 years life, if not 120.
Yeah, okay.
And you can get at it all. And you don't need somebody to come and do it for you. So all of that adaptability of space and flexibility of services was fundamental. Then we came to the outside. Normal double glazed building in London, an office building, costs about £2,000 a square metre, the facade. So I set a target of 1,000. Internally, on the basis that we get well under. And when we had a big first conference with the scientists, there were 500 in the room, I asked, do you want to have opening windows? Expecting the answer to be no. Of course, the first scientist said, of course we don't want opening windows, we'll spill some mercury and somebody will die outside in the street. But another scientist, the other side of the room, said, I do want opening windows, please. So we were now sitting there thinking, oh boy, we've got to control our environment. These guys want to open their windows. Uh-oh. So we have to really think very hard about the relationship of the types of spaces and the facade and how we could do it. So the other thing that came through was a lot of their experiments are done in dark rooms. So they don't need huge amounts of open window glass. But what they do like is a quality of light that tells them what's happening outside. So the idea of cast glass that's translucent and insulated and windows in it led us to develop a structural cast glass technology. And we've actually been forced, against my wishes normally, to have an international patent because some other people are trying to sell to other architects that they designed it when they didn't.
The context of the building is also significant. I think it's a conservation area.
It's in the conservation of Fitzrovia. It's right opposite Arup's headquarters, the big engineering firm. And did they design the engineering? They were the engineers in structures, vibration, mechanical, electrical, and sound in the building. We were the engineers of the facade and the building as architects. But the model actually was only 100 meters further up, which was Fitzroy Square, which had an orientation on the south side, looking into the square and the trees. And it's a building I used to work in when I worked at Arup. And that building has a white render. I remembered it having a white render to put light into the square. Today, it's all white. So I thought we should go and actually find a way of doing a white building because this street we're on and the site we were facing north, the street had big plane trees, it was quite dark. And then I thought, actually, every building you see in London or in a city is dark because the windows are always dark in daytime. And at night time, when the lights go on, all you see are the light fittings. It's actually dreadful. So we designed a white building for the day and a white building at night.
You are not only an architect, but also you like to write.
Yes.
As far as I know, you say, I use words or poetry to excavate ideas. Like an archaeologist, you say. It is very interesting. And you say that architects are dreamers. And also, I mean, this is a kind of a transparency to art and creation, which is, of course, which can easily come together with architecture. But on the other hand, you have a great interest in engineering, as far as I know, because you also had a partnership. You have developed some technologies related with glass and other issues. So, I mean, you somehow prove that engineering and art can come together easily. On the contrary, the opposing characters of architects and engineers.
I think that, yeah, you're kind of big picture stuff, but in a way, words are a real common denominator for human beings. We all understand words. the fact that we can manipulate them on paper to find ideas, conceptual ideas, is something I started fairly early on when I was young. And I found it easier. And interestingly, the images of the words didn't stick in my brain as much as when you drew. I've since discovered those two operations occur in totally different parts of the brain. So there's very little danger that you write something and you, let's say on paper, and you scrunch it up and you throw it in the bin. It probably goes away with the paper. You do a drawing, first idea of a building, you scrunch it up and it goes in the bin, it's stuck.
Yeah, that's
and you've got, and students when they're studying architecture, you fight to get rid of this first thing that you had. And often tutors will say, well, that's probably your best idea. You should maybe go back to it. So I think that particular aspect of words and manipulating ideas with words is actually a very gentle way into a project, but it also enables you to talk to the client about things he would not even think about in terms of architecture and what my role might be. Because the question is, you want a house, your grandmother's old, do you want a room for your grandmother, or are you going to plan to go into it when you're old, or actually you're going to buy a boat and sail away? It can change the whole approach to your building. So that's why I like words. Then comes to the architect engineer, and in a way it's almost like apartheid sometimes. You've got the mental structure of the engineer and the architect are quite different because of their training. So the engineers I have always enjoyed working with and working in engineering have been with people who actually think and are active in things well outside engineering.
Does that firm active still?
No, it actually went to demised 2 years ago, accidentally.
Wow.
It had 200 people working for it, and it's very regrettable and very sad because they decided to go into and develop a gros œuvre, basically concrete, a lot more. And they never really had specialized in that, well, up to a point. But they did a project in Southeast Asia and it worked very well. And one of the smaller firms out there was a firm of structural engineers in concrete. So they brought one of the directors over and used, in a way, him and his link back to Southeast Asia as a source of developing that work up. But unfortunately, 2 or 3 projects went a bit wrong. The contractors didn't pay the engineering, the firm. And in France, if you can't pay your staff 1 month, you're in a tribunal very quickly. And it's a pity they didn't ring me up or Martin. I'm sure we could have solved the problem. But a project management company in France now owns RFR. And we employed about 50, I think 50 or 60 of them, from what I know.
Yeah,
and of course, they now in their portfolio have all these great projects of the pyramids of the Louvre and
yes,
the Arch, Parc de la Villette, the Arch, and
the Arch, yes.
Tragedy, a tragedy, personal tragedy as well for Kieran, Peter's son, because it was his mistake in a way, I think.
You worked in UK, of course, and in France, in Germany, in Malta, in Spain, but not much in Dubai, China. Is it so?
Yes,
because many of the architects coming from your geography now are establishing either sub-offices or they are working
I wrote a poem about it when the banks crashed. I wrote a poem about the banks crashing and everybody going fishing. Okay, so the architects went fishing, and I linked it with a song of Pete Seeger, which is "Where have all the architects gone?"
Very old.
All gone to Dubai, everyone.
All gone to Dubai.
But we won a competition for a monument for Dubai in 1987. Spent 2 years working on it. The Dubai municipality was the client. My sponsor was the chief executive. And they couldn't find any money to pay us anything. And we experimented in double curvature of glass laminated, developed new geometries for breaking up a sphere based on arabesques, managed to build these 3-dimensional models, and even Arab didn't have the computing at the time. And then there was a man waved a sword in Kuwait, threatened to invade Kuwait, so they all stopped it. Just like that. And I discovered afterwards, and it's very interesting, how at a major embassy dinner, we had been asked to bring, by the French consulate in Dubai and the embassy in Abu Dhabi, to bring the Grand Projet of Monsieur Mitterrand to Dubai for an exhibition linked with the monument. And there was a wonderful party, and I was talking to the British ambassador, and the French ambassador came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder. He said, Monsieur Ritchie, est-ce que vous pouvez avoir l'honneur de nous parler en français? So would I speak to the British ambassador in French? It's a French evening, please, Mr. Ritchie, and you're representing France. But I discovered that what was the Pearl of Dubai, which was the monument we designed, had become essentially the object of gift or not gift between that and buying Mirage jets.
Yeah, I see, okay.
So I vowed I'd never go back to Dubai again.
What about China?
20 years ago, well, I was at a conference at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London, and a moderator asked me at the end of a talk with Catherine Hamnett, who's a t-shirt designer. Catherine, you're having your t-shirts made in China. Is it good quality? And she said, it's fantastic. Mr. Ritchie, why are you working in China? And I said, no, not until they get out of Tibet. So I would not work in China. They have 500,000 students of architecture today.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's in China, let alone all of the other ones over here. So when they get the idea, the real ideas, they're going to take over. Anyway, it's a thought. But I think there are enough people in China and their culture. Just to import Western stuff doesn't appeal to me at all. And most of the architects I've talked to have worked there, Volker and Marg, people like Piano and others, they get their basic peanut percentage, and it's then taken over by the Bureau d'Etudes, the engineering forest.
Yes.
If that gives you fun, I doubt really that much fun. What it is, it's status, symbolic, and you're feeding the machine.
Yeah, budget.
Probably.
That's true.
Yeah. Anyway, the other thing is I don't like spending huge amounts of my life on aeroplanes.
That's true.
It's true. It's real.
Yeah. But on the other hand, do you believe a sense of locality in this sense? Because what you said between the words, they are trying to import Western ideas, appearance, and representation, whatever it is.
Well, I think there's
For example, in Malta, what are you doing? I mean, you are making a master plan, but how does the climate, regionality, contextuality, and locality affect your work?
Fundamentally, we skip China for a minute because we all know what's going on in China more or less. But in Malta, it's actually, the client is the brewer of Malta, Farsons. And they have had an old brewery building, 200 meters long, with a wonderful brew house at the end, sort of Art Deco style, designed in 1948 by my client's father, who trained as an architect in Milan. And he asked the Scottish architect, Mr. Binney, to come and help him do this building. So it's a sort of a latter-day Art Deco, sort of 15 years, 20 years later. Interestingly, Danes were the engineers, and they invented two things on that building, on the brew house. So my client wanted to retain the brew house, but wanted to create a sort of business park, but wanted a real good use for the main building, which is smallish. So it's both restoration, historic, and new buildings. And the design of the new buildings are based on the classic, if you like, court buildings and other buildings of Malta, where you have gardens. So we started with gardens, not buildings. So every floor has gardens either side of it. In this, so it's more like a campus. Whereas the disease that's now arriving in Malta is high rise, and it's going to destroy Malta. Yes. And I've met the Prime Minister on a one-to-one basis to explain the dangers of it, and explained this master plan we did for 80 hectares, which could take 100,000 more people on Malta without you even noticing it, rather than go into the sky or expand the territory on a relatively small island. And my client backed that as well. So that's an ongoing bit of politics. But the actual buildings, the new ones we're doing, are actually on site now. So, and more recently, talking about contextual and locality, and in a way looking for that genius loci of place. I was invited by email to be considered to design a theatre in Cairo.
Yeah, I have seen it.
And I thought that's really interesting, given Brexit and the problems that, I mean, I'd never thought I'd believe seeing my own country shoot itself twice in the foot, but it's managing to do it. That the approach of doing a Skype call with Egyptians struck me as not very interesting. But it was explained to me that they had Skyped 2 other architects in England. So I thought, okay. But I had a friend, part of the, what I call Ritchie net, graduates from my office. We were all over the place. And they're a real network developing now. One of them, I knew, spent a year teaching in one of the universities in Cairo, so I rang him up. And I knew he was married to an Egyptian, a professor from the school, and they were living in Hamburg. And I'd only seen him 6 months before with their new baby. And I asked him, can you ask Bido, his wife, whether we should just get on an aeroplane and go and see them? And the answer came back, yes, and you'll probably get the job. But the advantage to me personally is I would see the site, I'd meet the client, and I would be in a position to think, yes, I can help or I can't help.
It's a theatre building.
Yeah. And it's underground, which is not a bad thing for a theatre, actually.
Yeah, that's true.
And that is now, we're now finished the design, more or less. And now we're going to help them develop up their expertise again, because since 4 years ago, when they had the troubles in Egypt, the value, going back to value and money, the value of the Egyptian pound to the British pound, 4 years ago you could buy a British pound for 9 Egyptian pounds. Today it's 24 Egyptian pounds. So they can't afford to buy our skills at the levels that we're used to. But because I'm interested more in culture and life, to me it's not actually a problem. So it's not about the money, it's actually now how do we reinforce their base, if you like, in Egypt. And our client, who's a developer and not poor, actually really appreciated it. So I approached my other consultants in England that I work with, a physicist. You prepared to do a bit of education on the back of this work? Yes. So is the acoustician, so is the lighting person. So it's great.
Yeah, I always think that this is a flexibility of Turkish architects to work with, but you do the same.
Yes, and I think, and you're more nimble if you're small.
That's true.
You know, if you're 20, 25, you're 300, 500 people.
That's true. You have won actually more than 60 competitions.
More, slightly more than that. Yeah.
Maybe more than 70 national and international awards.
I think it's because I've had too many birthdays.
That's very nice. And but I think Royal Academy of Music is very significant between all these, because I mean it has been recognized by many critics, and it is a very unique work as far as I know. And I had a chance to see the Leipzig glass hall. Yes, I've been there for a conference actually, accidentally, but then I recognized that that's your building, and I had a chance to look at it, and really it's a very good experience. But I mean, you work on very different scales. I mean, you have designed a telephone box for BT, or I mean
door handle.
Yeah, door handle to maybe a urban plan scale. So I mean, is it a kind of a richness, or is it a significant difficulty? I mean, design is design, of course.
Yeah, but I think design is a process as we know.
Which is adaptable to all scales.
Exactly. And I think it's also, the way I work is we have always 2 people on a project, even if it's a door handle. Because people have holidays, they get ill, they have babies, they want to leave, you know, for 6 months, 9 months. They want to go on sabbaticals to India and things. So having a flexible approach to that means that if it's a small project, just trying to think right now, the theatre is being done jointly between Hamburg, my friend, because it's part of the net, and he wants to learn about theatres. So that's us educating that side, which is fine. A young guy in our office who worked on the Royal Academy of Music is working on the theatre. We have the same lighting designer, and the technical director, a very young guy at the Royal Academy of Music, is a trained stage lighting engineer. So I invited him. Do you want to do the stage lighting for this theatre in Cairo? And he jumped at it because he, as an academy, they shut down for the summer. He's got spare time. So it's all kind of this wonderful richness. And I think it's the same whether, approaching a design of a master plan, and the Egyptian client now wants me to, well, apparently I've already done some work, a narrative writing about an 85-hectare site, which is 15 minutes from the pyramids and 15 minutes from the new Sphinx Airport that opens this year. And to explain to him that you can approach it a bit like Malta, start with landscape, don't start with buildings. That will give you your uniqueness. It actually makes it a really nice place to come. And when you're phasing the buildings, that landscape is there for people to enjoy, so they're not surrounded by just a building site. So this sort of way of thinking, he embraced. It was quite interesting. So I said it'll come down to grids eventually. It'll come down to car parking spaces, probably. But don't start there, because that's relatively easy. Start with the really important ideas.
You referred Brexit as a mistake. What other mistakes do you observe when you look at the development of London? Because one of my friends say that the Dubai thing or the China thing is not a one-way relation. As they try to represent West on the return. We can easily observe a sense of Dubaification, let's say, in London.
It's right next to where I live, and I live in a house designed ironically by the engineer that designed the docks and London Bridge, designed this house. And it's the nearest house to Canary Wharf. And Dubai has gone up, well, America went up first in the back garden, and now Dubai nonsense going up. And it's a kind of madness, a total and utter madness. I remember being involved with the London Docklands Development Corporation back in the 1980s when they set up. And I was on a design review board. I was pleading for a master plan for the whole of the Isle of Dogs. And I was told, this is free market capitalism.
Yeah,
that's it. So the water's nearly all gone from Canary Wharf, which is part of the flood defence system for London, East London. And they don't care. They filled it up with car parks. And they go bust a couple of times economically. Now they're converting the car parks back to shops. I mean, the whole thing is, to me, a sort of madness at that level. But what we see above ground, even in the City of London, I would say the City of London skyline is pretty ugly. There are some especially ugly buildings.
And it rapidly changed,
Yes, and that
in the recent
almost,
few years.
And that was almost, I think, Peter Rees, before he was the chief planner for the City of London, knew him very well, still know him very well. It was almost like, well, fin de siècle, I'm going to have some fun before I leave. It's what it looks like. It looks like the decisions weren't as fundamentally, seriously criticised or critically evaluated as they make out, in my opinion.
You say beauty is nonlinear.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Nonlinear beauty is also mathematical, but in the real world, the way leaves fall off a tree, the way they change colour, the way they hit the ground, the way that we love walking by the sea. We watch the light move on waves, small waves or big waves. We watch and enjoy the way the snow comes in or comes down. These are all unpredictable events. Yes, you could say with all the computing power in the world in 1,000 years' time, we could predict every behaviour of every leaf on the planet. But it's a kind of boring thing to do. But it's that unpredictability that has the poetry. And we, as engineers or as architects, we have to predict better everything that we do. So this is the yin-yang for me of trying to find the beauty in architecture where I can think about the way light will fall on the building, like on cast glass, and design the rib of that glass to give us a completely different type of light, morning, evening, afternoon, all the time, even on the same facade. And at the same time, it'll clean itself. So you can watch the water on these 1 million miniature downpipes. You can actually watch the rain and watch it come down.
It's a Taoist paradigm.
Taoist almost, yeah. And it is that. It's finding that in the work.
Yeah, and you also refer something, until 50, you will not be taken seriously. And I have other versions of this saying, I mean, especially in architecture, until 50, I mean, you make an accumulation, then you start to produce your better, more conscious, critical products, designs. How do you see your position from now onwards?
From now onwards, I was going to say why I said that in the first place.
Yes, you can.
Was the fact I was working in France, and I probably had designed and had built 15 buildings by the time my colleagues my age, who stayed in England or in Scotland, were still working for the firms learning. And I remember asking a French Mandarin, a bureaucrat, you seem to trust us. You know, I'm a Scotsman, there's the Englishman, Martin, who's a bit older, and Peter Rice, who's a bit older still. But I'm, 30. And he said, but you're old enough to be married, have children. Why wouldn't we trust you? You've been trained properly, haven't you? Completely different approach to the kind of, I'm not taking a risk approach in England. Very conservative country. So living and working and creating and inventing so much in England, actually when you look at it, probably 3/4 of it is done abroad. And I have methods of working with industry that it seems very rare amongst architects. And I think that's because of my engineering side. You can go to a company and say, let's develop a new technique. And they can look at my portfolio and I can look at their work and you can say, yeah, we could come up with something really interesting. So we do it together. And if we do invent with them, we always try to make sure they have the patent, because having a patent for us is meaningless. Well, I'm going to run around the world chasing people. No.
And what?
Oh, now what now? Yes. Well, I'm over 70, 71, and I feel like I'm a 50-year-old. Yeah, 70 is the new 50. Yeah, is the way to look at it. Just starting. And you can look at it and say, some clients say, well, when we look at what you've done, either on your website or in books, we can't find your style, other than you seem to refine everything beautifully, and you build things very well. I said, well...
It's a compliment.
I think it is, because I said, well, if you were creative like me, and you were getting out of bed in the morning, and you were going to do the same thing again, you'd be bored. I just don't do boredom. My boredom threshold is very low.
It was a very joyful conversation. I hope we could have more time. Maybe we can repeat it within time.
When I'm 55.
Yes, when you are 55. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
For being with us. We are waiting for the lecture.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.